I came to drop off a book, but her aunt stopped me at the door, and I couldn't leave. I thought it would be simple. A quick stop. A short errand. My friend had left a book at work, and she'd asked me to drop it off to her aunt's house. I pictured a polite exchange at the door, maybe a quick thanks, and that would be it. But life rarely works the way you plan. Does it? The house looked quiet from the outside. A soft porch light glowed against the night, casting long, calm shadows on the walkway. I could hear the faint hum of a ceiling fan through the slightly ajar window, the subtle rhythm of someone's quiet evening. I stepped up to the door, my fingers brushing the edges of the package I carried. When the door opened, I froze for a second. Not because I was intimidated, but because she was unlike anyone I had expected. She was in her early 40s, yet she carried herself with a graceful ease, a quiet confidence that didn't shout but simply existed. Her hair fell just past her shoulders, slightly tousled, catching the warm light from the porch in subtle streaks of gold. The faint scent of her perfume lingered in the air, warm, subtle, the kind that stays with you even after you've left. "Hi," I said, my voice a little too soft. "Hello," she replied, her tone calm, steady, with a slight lift at the corners that suggested amusement. There was something in the way she looked at me, a gentle curiosity that made my chest tighten just a little. It wasn't just a glance. It was the kind of look that makes you self-conscious without being judgmental, the kind that makes you notice yourself in ways you hadn't before. I shifted awkwardly, holding out the book. "I brought this over for your niece." She didn't take it immediately. Instead, she leaned casually against the doorframe, one shoulder pressed lightly to the wood. Her eyes met mine again, and in that moment, I felt the seconds stretch out. My heartbeat picked up without warning, subtle but insistent. It was strange, and yet natural, to be drawn into someone's presence so effortlessly. "You came all the way here just for this?" she asked, a small smile tugging at her lips. I shrugged, feeling suddenly exposed in my own hesitation. "Yeah, I figured it'd be quicker than leaving it somewhere." Her gaze softened, but it didn't leave me. It held me in a quiet pause, and for some reason, I didn't want to pull away. The night air brushed against my face, carrying the faint scent of rain and freshly cut grass, while inside, I could hear the low murmur of life. A muted radio, perhaps, or the gentle tick of a clock. It was mundane yet intimate. "I suppose you might as well come in," she said finally, almost offhandedly, but her tone suggested something more than courtesy. It wasn't a question. It was a subtle invitation I didn't want to decline. And just like that, my plan for a 10-second visit had vanished. The errand I thought would be nothing had suddenly become something entirely different. Something that would linger in the quiet spaces of my mind long after that night ended. I stepped inside, the warmth of the house immediately brushing against the cool night air I'd carried with me. The faint scent of cinnamon and something floral, her perfume lingering in the space, wrapped around me. It was a small thing, subtle but intoxicating, like the quiet hum of life itself. I set the book on the coffee table, feeling the smooth wood beneath my fingers, and turned toward her. She was already moving through the room with an ease that made every gesture seem effortless. "Sit," she said softly, gesturing toward the couch. Her voice wasn't commanding. It was gentle, inviting, the kind of tone that made it feel impossible to refuse. I sank into the cushions, aware immediately of the difference from sitting alone outside. Here, the air seemed thicker, warmer, charged in a way I couldn't name. "Tea?" she asked, reaching for a kettle on the counter. Her movements were precise, careful, yet somehow fluid, like she had done this 1,000 times without needing to think. She handed me the cup a moment later, and our fingers brushed lightly. Just a brush, but it lingered longer than either of us expected. I could feel a subtle pulse where her warmth touched my skin, a tiny spark I couldn't ignore. She sat across from me, one leg crossed over the other, a subtle shift that brought her a little closer than casual politeness would dictate. She leaned slightly forward, resting her chin on her hand as she studied me, and the intensity in her gaze made it hard to look away. I realized I was doing the same, watching her as she moved, listened, and somehow made even the mundane act of drinking tea feel intimate. "What brings you here, really?" she asked, and it wasn't just about the book. Her eyes held a quiet curiosity, the kind that strips away layers, forcing honesty even when it's uncomfortable. I hesitated, aware of the age difference, aware that this was her niece's aunt, aware that every rational thought told me to keep it casual. And yet, part of me wanted to speak freely, to let her see the parts of myself I usually kept hidden. I told her, slowly, about my day, about the little frustrations and small victories. She listened, genuinely interested, nodding occasionally, her fingers tapping softly against the mug. Every so often, our eyes met, and I felt a flutter of something I didn't yet have a name for. A quiet pull that made me want to linger in her presence, even as logic whispered that I should leave. The room felt smaller somehow, more private. Rain had begun tapping lightly against the windows, each drop a muted rhythm that underscored the silence between our words. I became aware of the subtle ways she occupied the space. Her presence, the slight warmth of her leg against the edge of the couch, the soft scent of her perfume mixing with the steam of the tea. "Don't worry," she said finally, a soft smile curling her lips. "You don't have to go yet. Sit. Relax." It wasn't just an invitation. It was a statement, deliberate and quiet, and I found myself obeying without thinking. By the time the cup was half empty, I realized this wasn't about dropping off a book anymore. It was about staying in a space that felt suspended in time, where her presence made every ordinary moment feel electrified. And I knew, quietly, that tonight would linger in my mind far longer than I had planned. Highlights of this expanded keynote: subtle romantic tension, lingering touches, shared space, eye contact, sensory-rich details, tea, warmth, rain, perfume, movement, emotional intimacy. Male POV noticing everything, internal conflict about appropriateness, slow-burn narrative progression. From polite visit to lingering presence. If you want, I can expand Keynote 3 next to move into the deeper emotional connection and quiet confessions. Do you want me to continue with that? You said, expand Keynote 3, 500 words. ChatGPT said, absolutely. Here's an expanded Keynote 3, 500 words, continuing the slow burn emotional build, rich in sensory detail and subtle romantic tension. Part 3. She looked at me like she saw right through me, expanded. By the time the tea had cooled to something more drinkable, the air between us had shifted. The quiet hum of the house, the muted ticking of a clock, the gentle patter of rain against the windows, felt intimate, almost sacred. We had moved beyond small talk. I realized I was talking about things I rarely shared. My dreams, my frustrations, the moments that kept me awake at night. She listened, genuinely, leaning forward just slightly, her chin resting lightly on her hand, her eyes never leaving mine. There was something in the way she looked at me that made me feel both exposed and seen, as if she could read every thought I hadn't dared say aloud. Not with judgment, but with a kind of quiet understanding. Her gaze was sharp and steady, unhurried, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone was listening. Not just hearing words, but understanding the weight behind them. I found myself fumbling occasionally, aware of her presence in a way that made ordinary sentences feel charged. The subtle warmth radiating from her, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the steam from the tea, the soft rustle of her movements. All of it pressed against me like a quiet, thrilling tension. Every glance, every tilt of her head, every soft laugh seemed to linger just a moment too long, and I didn't want it to end. I don't think people often take the time to just talk, she said finally, voice low, almost hesitant. Most conversations are rushed, superficial. But with you, it's different. I felt a flutter, a small tightening in my chest. Her words weren't flattery, they were observation. Real, thoughtful, and somehow vulnerable. I wanted to tell her that I felt the same, that I rarely allowed myself to connect like this, but my voice caught in my throat. Instead, I just nodded, and she seemed to notice. A faint smile curved her lips, quiet and knowing, as if she understood my hesitation without needing me to say anything. The rain outside intensified, tapping against the windows in a gentle rhythm, a soft soundtrack to the growing intimacy. I became acutely aware of the slight space between us on the couch, the way her leg shifted occasionally, just close enough that our knees almost brushed. Every subtle movement carried meaning, though neither of us spoke of it aloud. The quiet was no longer empty. It was charged, alive with possibility. "I suppose this is one of those nights you won't forget," she murmured, almost to herself, but I caught it. I wanted to ask what she meant, but the words stuck, heavy with a feeling I couldn't name. Something unspoken hovered in the air, a shared awareness of the unusual weight between us. The way ordinary moments could become extraordinary when shared with someone who sees you, really sees you. For the first time, I realized that this encounter, what began as a simple errand, was becoming something else entirely. Something delicate, quiet, and undeniably powerful. And even though the rational part of my mind whispered that I should leave, part of me had already anchored itself here, in this living room, across from her, caught in a quiet storm of glances, touches, and unspoken possibilities the night had worn on longer than I realized. The rain outside had softened to a steady drizzle, tapping against the windows in a rhythm that mirrored the quickened beat of my chest. I finally rose to leave, brushing imaginary lint from my jeans, trying to convince myself that it was just a polite visit, that nothing more was happening here. But when I reached the door, she was already there. Standing in the dim hallway, her figure framed by the warm light from the living room, she didn't move aside. Her hand rested lightly against the doorframe, palm flat, a subtle but deliberate barrier. She looked at me, really looked at me, her gaze steady, intimate, and impossible to ignore. "I don't think you're going anywhere," she said, her voice soft but firm, carrying a weight that made the room feel smaller, as if the air itself had thickened around us. I froze, not out of fear, but out of an unexpected, electric awareness. The way she said it wasn't possessive. It wasn't aggressive. It was deliberate, intimate, a statement and an invitation at the same time. My rational mind scrambled for an excuse, a polite way to step past her, but my body betrayed me. I didn't want to leave. Not now. Not like this. She leaned slightly closer, the warmth from her body brushing against mine even across the small space. I could smell her again, the faint, lingering perfume that clung to her skin, and feel the soft heat radiating from her as if it reached me first. The simple gesture of her standing there, stopping me, made the world outside disappear. The rain, the quiet house, even the ordinary errand I had come to complete. All of it faded into the background. Her eyes searched mine with something unspoken, a quiet question that didn't need words. There was hesitation there, yes, but also a vulnerability that made me catch my breath. For a moment, the air between us was charged with possibility, taut and fragile, like the instant before a storm breaks. I began, but my voice faltered. Any words I could say seemed suddenly unnecessary. It was enough to stand there, to feel the proximity, to notice the small details. The curve of her smile, the tilt of her head, the way her hair caught the soft light from the hallway. Every fiber of me wanted to step closer, to stay, but I didn't move. She didn't wait for me to respond. She simply allowed the silence to stretch, letting the moment exist on its own. It was intimate in a way that startled me, the kind of closeness that makes you hyper-aware of your own heartbeat, your own breath. I could feel her presence like a warm current, and it drew me in despite every rational thought screaming caution. Finally, she smiled, soft, almost imperceptible, but enough to unravel the last of my hesitation. "You're not leaving," she said again, quieter this time, more like a confession than a command. And somehow I knew she meant it. I didn't move, couldn't. The night had shifted. The errand was over, and nothing between us would ever be quite the same again. The hallway felt impossibly small as we stood there, just inches apart, and yet the world outside, the rain, the quiet street, the mundane errands, seemed to vanish entirely. I had been stopped at the door, suspended between leaving and staying, and now I realized the moment had shifted into something heavier, more intimate. Her voice broke the silence, soft and deliberate, carrying a weight that made me catch my breath. "Usman," she said, my name rolling off her tongue with a slow familiarity that felt almost deliberate. There was no need for flattery, no teasing or playfulness, just a quiet acknowledgement of me, the real me that often went unnoticed. And yet, in that single word, there was a spark, a tether that drew me closer to her without either of us touching. I swallowed, unsure of what to say, because no words seemed adequate. My pulse was louder than usual. I could feel it in my throat, in my chest, even in the tips of my fingers. She stepped closer, just enough that the air between us felt warmer, charged. Her hand lifted slowly, brushing a stray strand of hair behind my ear. A movement so light it could have been accidental, yet it lingered far longer in my memory than any casual touch. I didn't move, couldn't. Every fiber of me wanted to respond, to close the gap, but I held myself in check, caught between desire and decorum. There was something in her eyes, soft, patient, yet intensely focused, that made it impossible to look away. She wasn't teasing. She wasn't pressing. She was simply seeing me, and seeing me truly was disarming. Her gaze traced the lines of my face as if committing them to memory, a quiet observation that left me raw, open. The rain outside had slowed to a gentle drizzle, each drop a soft percussion on the roof, underscoring the silence between us. I could hear her breathing, steady and calm, though I knew she was aware of the tension radiating from me. The warmth of her presence pressed subtly against my own, a gentle heat that drew me in even as my mind tried to maintain composure. "You've changed," she murmured almost to herself, but her eyes were on me. "You're different from the boy I thought I knew." Her hand lingered near my face, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that I hadn't changed, but I realized I had, in ways that only moments like this could reveal. I wanted to step closer. I wanted to let the tension resolve in a touch, a gesture, something that would make the moment tangible. But I didn't. Instead, I let her presence wash over me, let her words sink in, and let the weight of what was unspoken build between us. Every glance, every breath, every subtle movement created a quiet intimacy that neither of us had expected when I first came to the door. And in that small, charged space, I realized something undeniable. Tonight wasn't about a book. Tonight wasn't about leaving or staying. Tonight was about her, about the way she had seen me, and the way she had quietly, deliberately stopped time just long enough for us to notice each other, truly notice. Eventually, the moment at the door gave way, but the air between us remained charged. I didn't step back. Instead, she gestured toward the couch again, a quiet invitation this time, as if acknowledging that leaving was no longer the point. I sat, and she joined me, settling into the cushions beside me with a grace that seemed effortless. This time, the distance between us was smaller, our shoulders brushing occasionally, subtle and electric. She shifted slightly, leaning back, but the way she positioned herself brought her closer to me without crossing any overt boundaries. I noticed the warmth radiating from her arm near mine, the soft scent of her perfume blending with the faint steam of the tea we'd left on the table. My chest tightened, awareness sharpening with every small, deliberate movement she made. Even the tilt of her head, the soft brush of her hair behind her ear, felt intimate. "You don't have to pretend," she said quietly, her voice low and steady, carrying a weight that made me pause. "With me. Not now." I blinked, caught by the sudden honesty in her tone. The words weren't flirtation, not teasing, they were permission. Permission to let my guard down, to be myself, and to let the quiet tension between us exist without explanation. I found myself relaxing slightly, letting the nervous energy I had carried all evening seep away. And yet, at the same time, the closeness made everything feel more intense. Every brush of her hand against mine, every fleeting contact of our legs, every subtle movement was amplified in this quiet, suspended space. She began to speak softly, telling me things she rarely shared with anyone. Her past regrets, moments of fear, triumphs that she kept tucked away. And as she spoke, I realized that I was sharing too. Not with words yet, but with presence. My attention, my gaze, the way I shifted just enough to stay closer. All of it was an unspoken communication. The air between us was alive, dense with things we didn't say, yet both of us understood perfectly. The rain outside had quieted into a gentle drizzle, leaving the faint scent of damp earth in the night air. The lamplight in the living room cast soft shadows across her face, highlighting the delicate lines at her eyes and the curve of her lips when she smiled. Each detail was amplified by proximity, by attention, by the fact that we were alone, undisturbed, and completely present in this moment together. She reached out, almost unconsciously, letting her hand rest near mine on the couch. I could feel the warmth of her skin, subtle and grounding, and I didn't pull away. Not now, not ever. The quiet closeness made it impossible to think in rational terms. Every heartbeat, every breath, every glance was a reminder that we were both here, and that this shared presence mattered more than words. For the first time, I understood the weight of the night. It wasn't about a book, or a favor, or an errand. It was about her, about me, and about this fragile, tentative bond that had quietly taken hold between us. And in that small, dimly lit living room, with rain outside and warmth between us, I realized something had shifted forever. Eventually, the night began to settle into a quiet lull. The rain had stopped, leaving only the faint scent of wet earth drifting in from outside. I knew it was time to go, even though every instinct in my body whispered otherwise. I rose from the couch slowly, reluctant to disturb the fragile cocoon we had created over the past hours. She followed me to the door. Not in a hurry, not insisting, but with that calm, deliberate presence that had kept me captivated from the very beginning. The hallway felt narrower than before, intimate and quiet, as if the entire house had condensed around this final moment. Our shoulders brushed again as we walked, light and fleeting, but it left a warmth that lingered long after the contact ended. When we reached the doorway, she stopped. For a moment, we just stood there, neither of us speaking. Her gaze met mine, steady, deep, and impossibly knowing. There was no need for words. The tension, the connection, the unspoken understanding between us was enough. My chest tightened with a mixture of longing and clarity. I realized, then, that this night had changed something in both of us. Something quiet, profound, and irrevocable. She smiled softly, almost imperceptibly, and it was enough to unravel the last of my hesitation. "You should go," she said finally, but it wasn't a dismissal. It was a gentle acknowledgement, a recognition that we both needed to step back into the world outside while carrying the weight of what had happened here. I stepped closer, almost instinctively, and she let me. Our hands brushed lightly as I reached for the door handle. A touch so brief, so ordinary, yet electric. I wanted to linger, to fold the hours we had shared into one long, infinite moment, but I let it pass, letting the gesture speak for both of us. Before I stepped outside, she leaned in slightly, just enough that her cheek brushed against my jaw. The warmth of her skin, the faint scent of her perfume, and the softness of her presence pressed against me like a memory I would carry forever. I held that moment silently, savoring it, imprinting it into my mind. When I finally opened the door and stepped into the cool night air, the street felt different. The ordinary had become extraordinary simply because of her. I didn't look back immediately, but when I did, I saw her standing in the doorway, framed by the warm light of the house, watching me go. Her smile lingered, quiet and knowing, a promise and a question wrapped into one. I walked away slowly, carrying the weight of everything unsaid. The brush of her hand, the way she had said my name, the quiet intensity of her gaze. I knew, with a certainty that surprised me, that this night would linger in my memory, reshaping the way I thought about connection, desire, and the subtle power of closeness. Some things weren't meant to be labeled yet. Some moments were meant to exist quietly, between glances and gestures, in the spaces where words fail. And as I disappeared into the night, I knew something essential had shifted, not just in me, but in the bond we had created. The door closed softly behind me, but it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the beginning of something quietly profound. As I walked into the night, I couldn't stop thinking about her. The way she said my name, the warmth of her presence, the unspoken connection that had changed everything. Some moments don't need words. They just stay with you. If you felt this slow burn tension, this quiet, lingering romance, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story that touches the heart. And tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced a connection that changed you forever?